Lava Eel Vor. Lava Eel Vor. Teldrassil burned because a lava eel ate her mate as an act of love, and they were sent to different afterlives, and that made Sylvanas feel sad. This is what her arc should have been about. It's what Battle for Azeroth should have been about. The Horde on the defensive against an aggressive alliance that still blames them for the death of Varian and was led to believe by Gen that Sylvanas shot first in Stormheim. I cannot express enough how excited I was when I first saw this, because it looked so much more interesting and more in line with the idea of the Horde as family. They've moved past the ideology that made Garrosh possible, but the Alliance is about to have a reckoning of its own. That was the vibe of this cinematic, exemplified by Sylvanas' opening lines.
Ours is a cycle of hatred. Alliances forged and broken. We have paid the price for sharing this world. And we have forgotten what makes us strong.
Instead, we get Lava Eel Vor. No. I can do this. I can get through this without just sitting here and screaming about lava eels. I can. Okay. As far as we know, Alex Afrasabi was the driving force behind Teldrassil and Sylvanas' downfall as a character. Even Chris Metzen expressed surprise and confusion when he heard about it, which should tell you everything about how planned out that plot point was. Which is extremely interesting if you take into account that Sylvanas is a figure many recognize as a survivor of sexual violence, an aspect of her character that became less and less allegorical with each iteration of her death, until this most recent retelling by Golden in the Sylvanas book, where it's alluded to that things are being done to her body without her consent. They all but confirm she is a rape survivor, and Alex Afrasabi goes on to claim that he was in charge of personally writing her since 2006. If that's true, that means a serial abuser of women got to decide the trajectory of an angry and vengeful woman intimately traumatized by a man against whom she wants violent revenge. The distance this man should have had from this character cannot be overstated. But misunderstanding a character with complex trauma isn't the fault of one bad actor, as the latest book is readily showing us. To take an abuse survivor and turn them into their abuser is every survivor's worst nightmare actualized. Does it happen? Do survivors sometimes internalize and then externalize that pain, abusing others in the same way they were abused? Yes, abuse and trauma messes people up, and not everyone finds their way out of it cleanly, but it is in no way a story that any survivor needs to see. It is a depressing and harmful narrative that tells us we can't escape what was done to us, and that is recklessly callous storytelling. I'm not saying you can't ever write characters like that. What I am saying is that people who have no business touching that subject matter because they fundamentally do not get it should not be placed within 100 miles of writing a character like that. At no point should it have crossed Sylvanas' mind that Arthas was right, actually. At no point should she have ever been written into a position, mangled as she was by the process, to ever think that. This team needs to never touch this subject matter again, unless they are prepared to have it handled by people who know what the hell they're doing. But I won't hold my breath on that. No one ever actually wants to die. They want the pain to stop. Whatever the source of that pain is, whether it's a tragic loss, mental health, physical trauma, or any mix of hurtful experiences piling up on each other, it is about pain. Sylvanas was in pain when she threw herself off Icecrown Citadel. She didn't get any closure regarding Arthas because the writers inexplicably had her absent during the fight against him, and instead had the emotional weight of that confrontation rest on Tyrion Fordring. And I am sorry if you're someone who reads every book and really likes Tyrion after reading his and Eitrig's story of blood and honour, but many didn't have that experience and didn't know who he was or what connection he had to Arthas. Surprise, it wasn't remotely close to being on the same level as what Sylvanas has against him. Hell, Jaina has a greater claim to trauma over Arthas than Tyrion. Tyrion's whole thing is essentially wounded honour as a paladin, since Arthas was a member of the Silver Hand, and rage over Arthas bringing Lordaeron to ruin. Those are completely understandable, but they're not as intimate. Jaina was his lover when they were young, and he convinced her to have sex with him and bounced the morning after. She was there at Stratholme, and she could have stopped him, but didn't, and she has to live with that what-if for the rest of her life. Yet the writers didn't even have her there to represent the Alliance fighting against Arthas. No, they just have Jaina there to cry womanly pacifist tears over Varian managing the Herculean feat of showing basic empathy to a grieving father. But this is about Sylvanas. So she commits suicide, learns there's an eternal torture hell waiting for her on the other side for no good goddamn reason, and forges a pact with other women who suffered in undeath to survive that as well. This had great potential as a powerful message about overcoming what weighs you down by finding strength in other people like you. You know, if they hadn't then bolted the whole jailer thing to it, taking a moment of sisterhood between abused women and turning it into the moment a manipulative, domineering man tricked the woman his underling traumatized twice over. Which undermines every single moment going forward that was originally Sylvanas gaining power and taking back agency for herself as someone who had all power and free will forcibly ripped away from her. No, that's all the jailer now, not her. Great. I can't begin to stress how ill-equipped World of Warcraft is to deal with this subject so directly. It was a destructive move to have one of our factions be responsible for Teldrassil, to have players go through the motions of actively committing genocide against a member of the opposing faction. Not only was the burning, sloppily handled shock that ruined one of their most bankable characters, it shattered the Horde fantasy of outcasts banding together in a world that doesn't want them. Because gee, I wonder why the Alliance doesn't want to share the world with a faction that time and time again has been smacked with the villain bat into doing horrendous things. What a mystery this is. The moral high ground has been permanently and irrevocably handed to the Alliance, and villain batting the Alliance will not fix that. It'll just shatter the fantasy for Alliance players as well. They had the chance to undo all of this at Zereth Mortis, to use the Forge of Afterlives, an unimaginably powerful reality engine capable of creating new realms, and just erase the last 4 years of terrible decisions. Instead, they marched on, and the Horde can never escape that stain of a plot point. Teldrassil should have been a line Sylvanas was incapable of crossing. Being surrounded by desecrated forest land and dying elves should have triggered something other than dismissing her living self as a fool, which is just... who wrote that line? Rare are the times they've written this part of Sylvanas well, and it goes hand in hand with the way the Forsaken as a whole are handled. They're a group that went through immeasurable collective trauma, but Blizzard is more interested in writing them as kooky mad scientists with goth metal aesthetics, haha! I'm specifically thinking about that time during the first Siege of Orgrimmar, where they inexplicably had her talk about raising dead Blood Elf soldiers to Lorthamar's face and tell him that he would make a handsome corpse. Did you talk to anyone with any relevant experiences and how that shit affects them emotionally and psychologically? How do you sit there and think, yeah, it totally makes sense for a genocide survivor to joke about raising her own people the way she was, against her will, during one of the worst and last moments of her existence as a living person? Jesus Christ. After this, at the end of Shadowlands, I foolishly thought at least there's no way they can keep digging down. And then they had to go and prove me wrong. I didn't have high hopes for a Christie Golden book where both Sylvanas and Anduin were present, and putting everything else aside, I'm going to focus on their interactions. To have Anduin, whose core character traits are meant to be compassion and empathy, Look Sylvanas in the eye as a threefold survivor of unimaginable trauma and try to tell her that she had it better than him because she got to have a nice life before she was hurt is utterly ghoulish. Rich as you've never... Sir, you were heir to the throne of Stormwind. You were born into actual, literal royalty as opposed to just elven nobility. You are currently High King of the Alliance. Riding him with this stance is absurd. Does Anduin have anxieties and trauma? Absolutely. He's gone through a lot, and it should be addressed. I'm still kind of annoyed that they turned him into big manly warrior boy to offset the weird insecurities of a certain subset of the fandom, and one particular author. Though considering that subset still calls him gay like it's an insult, it doesn't seem to have done a goddamn thing, so they may as well have just kept him a slight and gentle priest. Anyway, having Anduin try to one-up Sylvanas on who had it worse and framing it as if he had a point shows an incredibly skewed point of view. It comes across as author favoritism, and it sands down any nuance or depth Anduin could have as a character to constantly position him as the perfect moral center of everyone around him. Not to mention the absolutely terrible messaging from another Golden book, Before the Storm, where it contrasts Anduin as someone who got back up after his traumas, whereas Sylvanas didn't. You know, completely ignoring that she didn't just lie down and rot, she carved out an empire and spat in Arthas' face, but she didn't immediately become a passive good girl, so you know, she didn't get back up from her traumas. This is in the same book where a floating wind chime tells Kalia Menethil, still deeply wounded by losing her family and country to a zombie apocalypse perpetrated by her very own brother, that the reason she hasn't been able to move on is essentially that she hasn't suffered enough yet, and that sometimes the greatest gifts come to us wrapped in blood and pain. Which is an utterly unhinged thing to frame as good and wise, and yet... And I'm still pissed off with that Compass cutscene where Anduin asked Sylvanas if this is what it felt like when she was dominated, and it still irritates me that only when it's happening to Anduin is there any concern and sympathy in the game's narrative for the exact trauma she went through. But it isn't for her, it's for Anduin, because the writers decided that getting to this point, committing genocide and dominating someone with a rune blade in her hand were lines she should be capable of crossing, so no one is in a position to feel any sympathy for her. Doing the same things done to her, to others, should have been her limit. Those traumas are intense pain points, the gravity of which is immensely difficult to fully escape, but they didn't have any meaningful effect on her actions going forward, only the faintest hint of a waver right before Anduin was dominated. Aphrosabi mangled Sylvanas out of spite over Garrosh being turned into a lightning rod, and the rest of the writing team just rolled with it instead of going with whatever the original idea for BFA was. And another thing, boiling Sylvanas' motivation for committing suicide after Arthas was killed without her present for it to "someone stole my kill" frames her like a petulant child and shows an absolutely staggering lack of understanding. Made even worse with Anduin's frankly suicide-shaming response, making the wrong-headed "you have so much to live for" argument and framing Sylvanas successfully killing herself as a selfish act that she should be ashamed of. Literally no one who has ever had suicidal thoughts or attempted suicide is encouraged by that line of thinking. That is exactly how you make a suicidal person feel even worse than they already do. And remember, they're at a point where they consider death a better alternative to staying alive. So what exactly do you think making them feel ashamed on top of everything else is going to do, genius? I can't believe they ended her current arc by having her jump off another building. I'm sure someone on the team thought they were very clever for that parallel. Christ. Even before Battle for Azeroth and Shadowlands came along, there was enough questionable treatment in the narrative in 2014 for someone to write an entire thesis about gender politics in Warcraft, using Sylvanas as a lens through which to analyse how the writers view women. I don't know, guys, I think there might be an issue.
Watch your clever mouth, bitch.
Yes. This line. The fact that Sylvanas, an abused and angry woman who is so often sexualized in art to be undead waifu material, is the one who gets called a bitch by Garrosh, a favorite character of Alex goddamn Aphrosabi, noted serial abuser of women. This shit is why I wasn't surprised by the lawsuit. My entire friend group was not surprised by the lawsuit, because how Blizzard feels about women is right there in the game. Sylvanas is a character who has survived 3 massive traumas that many players can relate to one way or another. She represents a lot of things for a lot of people. Even outside her major pain points, she and the Forsaken were stand-ins for outcasts and found family, the queer, the disabled, the mentally ill, people shunned by those who don't understand and don't want you to exist. They could have been amazing, and the people who loved this character, who loved the Forsaken, they put more time and effort into exploring what makes them appealing better than Blizzard has at any point. Because we saw parts of ourselves in this epitome of survival against all who would see you beaten down, and all the abusive actors at Blizzard saw was an out-of-control bitch who needed to be taken down and put in her place. Fuck you. And for the last time, can we agree that arrows in her quiver is illogical gibberish for an archer? That metaphor was written by someone thinking about arrows like they're bullets, as consumable, disposable ammunition. That is not how you treat arrows. How many times have we had quests where the goal is to retrieve arrows from a battlefield for reuse? You cherish your arrows and you retrieve them if at all possible because it takes time and skill to make more. Arrows are not bullets, bows are not guns. Applying the expendable logic of a gun to a bow is incoherent. All that being said, at the very least we can rest easy knowing we're done with doing an absolute hack job of writing a female character who has gone through unimaginable trauma and... What's that sound? Oh gods. Oh no. No! No, I can't go through this again! No!